Great. Well, it's fantastic to have you here. If we haven't already met, as Tom mentioned, my name is Rich. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's a real privilege to be able to share with you today, especially if you don't normally find yourself in church. Just like to say, I don't know what your friend has promised you to get you here, maybe a slap-up dinner afterwards. When I grew up in church, I used to get all my mates from school to come because we had free donuts. So we had custard donuts, jam donuts, you had all the donuts you can imagine. You're all now thinking, where's my donut, Rich? Why don't you still do that? We don't do that anymore. We do have biscuits and coffee. But seriously, whatever reason you've come, shallow reason, deep reason, I don't mind. We're just so glad you're here. And I really hope that by the end of what I get to share, that you'll still be really glad that you're here as well, and that you'll hear something today that actually is really impactful for your life. Today, we are exploring this whole question of a security that we long for. Where do we find it? Where do we find the security that we truly long for in life? And you might think, Rich, that's a slightly odd theme to choose. You know, of all the things that you could choose, of all the longings that you have in your life, of what you're thinking about right now, happiness, meaning, comfort, success maybe, intimacy, long-lasting relationships, family. You know, there's loads of things that we long for, isn't there? The list could go on. Why choose security? Why are we choosing this morning? Well, I think without security in our lives, without a firm foundation to build on, it's actually really hard to enjoy all the other things I just mentioned. Because all the other things I just mentioned, without security, actually often come under threat. It's hard to live in the good of them. It's hard to enjoy them. All the things that you build your life around, all the things that are really precious to you, can very easily come under threat and be taken away. Let me give you a little example. I went to the pub fairly recently with my family. There's 5 of us, 3 kids and Beth, and we were at the pub, and it was one of the days where I was particularly relaxed, just having a good time. I think it was a Saturday afternoon, and it was a good pub. I knew the food was going to be good, had a drink in my hand, just enjoying my family, enjoying my drink, looking forward to my food. We were having a laugh. I was fairly relaxed, or as relaxed as you can be with eating out with kids, and I was enjoying the moment. I was sat back, and then all of a sudden I became aware of a situation that was brewing over the other side of the bar from where we were sat. And basically there were 2 families, and there were 2 groups of guys with partners as well, but there was an altercation on the way. I could just tell. I picked it up out the corner of my eye. And Beth was none the wiser, but because I grew up on the mean streets of Wolverhampton in the Midlands, I clocked it straight away. And honestly, I was clocking entrances, I was sizing them up, I was thinking, where's the next fire escape? I was like, has the bar staff seen? Are they aware? No, they didn't have a clue. And I was just all of a sudden very heightened awareness of what was going on over the other side of the bar. And I was like Jason Bourne, okay? This was what I was like. I was calculating the risk, and all the while I was trying not to draw attention to myself. And I thought I was doing a pretty good job, but what I realized is I can't multitask to save my life. So what actually happened was I was doing all of this, thinking I'm playing it cool, and Beth was asking me questions like, what do you think you're going to have? You're going to have the burger? And I was like, yeah, I might have the... I wasn't finishing my sentence. She's like, Rich, can you help Zoe with a high chair? I was like, yes. And then did nothing. I was completely preoccupied with what was going on over the other side of the bar. I was otherwise engaged. Our safety and security being put mildly under threat had taken me out of my relaxed, enjoyable moment with my family. I was no longer enjoying my family. I was no longer enjoying my drink. I was no longer looking forward to my food. Instead, I was completely preoccupied. And I think this makes some degree of sense. You might resonate with that. You might have had some of those moments yourself. You need a certain amount of stability in your life and security in order to thrive. In order to thrive. Maybe you're feeling this right now in the area of your job. Maybe for you it's financial instability. You know, how are you going to keep making the ends meet, paying the bills, mortgage rates, interest rates keep climbing higher over the last few years. Or maybe it's your job, maybe increasing automation in the workplace. Maybe you're thinking, is AI going to be able to do my job 1,000 times faster very soon? Is there still going to be a place for me? Maybe you feel it in your family. Maybe you grew up in a family that was volatile, where there wasn't actually a level of stability, where there wasn't love shown consistently from an early age. And that can actually very easily lead to feelings of instability that actually live with us for quite a long time. Maybe it's just where you live. City life. I love city life. I love living in Leeds. Brings awesome opportunities. There's lots of things to do. There's always lots of people moving into the city, lots of new people to meet. But that also means the flip side is also true. That actually, just as quickly as people arrive, trusted friends often leave, don't they? Do you know that it used to be in the 1960s, the average time someone spent in a job was 16 years? What do you think it is now? 3, 2, very close, a year and a half. Year and a half is the average time. People are moving all the time. I think this all adds to a feeling of instability. Marriages, if we're honest, are less stable than ever. Institutions are changing. Politics is more fragile, it feels, at the moment, more polarizing than ever before. This all leads to vast feelings of instability. I think we feel it personally, and I think we actually also can feel it collectively as a society. So I want to ask the question, in this climate of instability, insecurity, what can we actually build on? Like, what isn't going to crack under the pressure? What's not going to let us down when we need it most? In Matthew 7 in the New Testament, Jesus uses this well-known parable, and even if you don't normally spend your time in church on a Sunday morning, you may well be familiar with it. He uses a well-known parable, which is a story with a main point, to expose instability and faulty foundations, and he invites us all to come and place our security in him, in one that will truly last the test of time and any storms that might come. So you find it in Matthew 7 from verse 24. It's going to come up on the screen, or you can find it in your Bibles if you've got them in front of you. This is what he says. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall. It did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. If you're a guest here today, then actually you're in a pretty good place. I'd say you're at an advantage. This is a Sunday school classic, which probably means if you spent any time in church when you were a kid, you built little models of these houses. You certainly sang the song. I'm not going to sing it now. I'm not going to invite somebody to, but you all know the song that I'm talking about. It is a banger, to be fair. It is absolutely classic. But it means that you are familiar. And the phrase goes, familiarity often breeds contempt. I don't know if it breeds contempt in this case, but I think it certainly breeds a level of indifference. You just become over familiar to a story like this. This isn't a kid's story with a cute song. This is a Jesus mic drop moment about the dangers and about the perils of building a life that will not last. It's a warning against futility and against wasting the one life that we've been given. And the story centers around 2 builders, 2 houses, 1 storm, and 2 foundations. 2 builders, 2 houses, 1 storm, and 2 foundations. Firstly, we see 2 builders. These builders actually have quite a lot in common. They both heard Jesus' words. They both want shelter from a storm, we see. They both have some skill in architecture. And actually, they both get the job done. Do you notice that in the story? Both houses are built. They both are decent at their jobs. In the children's Bibles that you might read, man, they go to town on the foolish builder. Like, often you've got one house that's like built like pristine and it like looks great and all the materials are good. And then you've got the other house the foolish builder built and it's like an IKEA trip gone wrong. It's like crooked and it's all messed up. But actually, that isn't what we see. Notice in the story, we're not told that the houses really look any different at all. The difference is one builder heard the wisdom of Jesus and put it into practice, and the other one ignored it. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like the wise man who built his house on the rock. Jesus here isn't contrasting good and evil. He's not contrasting a good builder and a bad builder. Instead, he's saying there is a wise builder and there is a foolish builder. Jesus is contrasting wise ways of living with foolish ways of living. And the word for wise here is in the Greek is phronimos. Okay? It can also be translated smart, intelligent, thoughtful. And at the time, there'd be, like today we talk about someone being a wise man, kind of rolls off the tongue, a little saying. Back then it was you would want to be a phronimos man. That would be like something that would be known for. That would be something that people would desire to be called a phronimos man. But then you have another man. And the foolish man is taken from the word moros. The chuckles in the room mean you know what's coming. This is where we get the word moron from. Not joking, that's true. This can also be translated stupid or unintelligent or just not thoughtful, just not living in a not thoughtful way. Jesus here is holding out to them the wisest way to build a life. Wisdom that actually works in the daily grind of life. Are you building your life in a wise and thoughtful way? Are you building your life in a wise and thoughtful way? Or are you just going with the flow often, just the next opportunity, the next thing that comes up in front of you? I think it's really easy today to think that we are wise because we have access to a lot of information. Today we are drowning in information, if we're honest. There's a guy called Buckminster Fuller in 1982 who popularized the idea of the knowledge doubling curve. Okay, hang with me for a moment. The knowledge doubling curve. So he says this: before 1900, human knowledge doubled approximately every century. Then by 1945, knowledge was doubling every 25 years. Then by 1982, knowledge, they reckon, was doubling every 12 to 13 months. So all the knowledge in the world, all the knowledge that people had access to, all the advancements, every 12 to 13 months. And today, they reckon knowledge doubles about every 12 hours in terms of the amount of information that you can get access to if you wanted to. Today, there is an overwhelming amount of knowledge we have access to. But experts agree there is such a thing as too much information. There is such a thing as too much information. Neil Postman, who wrote the book Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is just a really helpful book in understanding this, the moment that we're living in, he talks about this: the tie between information and action has been severed. Information is now a commodity which can be bought and sold, used as a form of entertainment, or worn like a garment to enhance one's status. It comes indiscriminately, directed at no one in particular, disconnected from its usefulness. We are glutted with information with no control over it, and we often don't know what to do with it. It's so easy to feel overwhelmed today, I think, and do nothing with the information that we have. Often we can do nothing with the information we have because we have access to information about stuff that's happening so far away. And there's actually nothing that you can really do. And instead you just feel the emotion of it and you're not able to put it into practice. Paralyzed by information and options. In a time of information overload, Jesus isn't offering here yet more information to you this Sunday morning, but he's offering a wisdom that works in the daily grind of life. Maybe you resonate with that today. With so many voices or so-called experts that we have access to, quick fixes and fads, maybe you're in search of a deeper wisdom, a wisdom that will actually work when it's put to work in your life. Jesus is setting before you today the wisest way to build a life. And that's really what he's talking about with these two houses. These two houses represent the life that you are building. Today we spend so much of our life in the home, don't we, if you think about it? But actually to Jesus' audience, they spent way more time. To the first century audience, the home was an even more holistic representation of their life. Homes weren't just places where they slept and eat and then they left to go to work. Homes were multi-generational, which meant grandparents weren't shipped off to homes, but they stayed with. Like the house grew with the family. As the family grew, the house grew. Not only that, but homes weren't kind of seen as investments like they are today, to be bought and sold. And you're thinking, if I buy here and then gets gentrified around it and then does well, then I'll sell, then I can go here. They didn't see them as commodities in quite the same way like that. Often people would be born and they would die in the same house. That was where they lived their entire life. Houses were also the economic base, often of the family. Like work would kind of happen in the home as well. That was where it all centered around. The home represented everything that was important to them. The home represents everything that's important to us in this parable. The house is the most kind of vivid metaphor that Jesus could find to grab their attention. He isn't just kind of shooting the breeze. He isn't just sharing a few thoughts, take or leave it. He's trying to grab their attention, and he's saying to his disciples and the crowds who are listening, he's saying, if you value the one life that you have and all the things precious to you in it, you need a solid foundation that will last. What you build your house on, what you build your life on, really, really matters. So you have these two foundations. And there's only really two options Jesus is holding out to us, and not a plethora, a multitude of options. Notice he narrows it down. He says there is rock or there is sand. And the foolish man hears the teaching of Jesus, and he settles for the sand. And what's interesting is we're not told why. We don't know, it's obviously a story that Jesus was telling, but he doesn't elaborate. Was he in a rush? I don't know. Did he not want to put in the work? Was he lazy? Don't know. Did he think he knew better than Jesus? Maybe. Did he not understand what was being offered, like the gravity of the invitation? Who knows? But we do know that it is a poor decision with serious consequences. From a builder's point of view, I think this is easily mocked. If you've ever had an extension done on your home or something and you've met that builder, just think how they would view this story. It's easily mocked. We almost picture someone, when we think sand, we kind of picture someone on the beach or something and looking at this soft, uneven sand and thinking, oh, it looks great. This is a brilliant place to build a house. And we think, how ridiculous. It's laughable to think that that would be a good idea. But I just want to strongman the foolish builder for a second, okay? Let's just kind of lean in. Let's try and put ourselves in his shoes for a moment. You would build in the summer before the rains came, wouldn't you? That's often a good time to do it. So that's when you would do it. And in the desert area in the Middle East where Jesus was teaching, what happens to sand that has been baked by the sun over time and hasn't experienced any water? What happens to that kind of sand, do you think? It becomes incredibly hard. It becomes almost like clay. If you've ever been in the garden and done some gardening, if any of you like that, it'd be really hard and compact, and that is what it would be like. It would have the illusion of being really hard. It would have the illusion of stability, actually. And actually, probably for a while, it might hold. But as we're going to come on to see, appearances can be really deceiving. So I wanted to ask, what would be our 21st century versions of the sands that we're often so tempted to build on? What often looks to us like a good and stable choice for the foundations of our lives? If I was to ask you right now, what is most foundational to your life? What is most foundational about your life? I wonder what you would say. Let's think about that for a moment. The reason I think sometimes that can be quite a hard question is I'm not sure how much time we kind of spend thinking about it. It's almost like there's maybe a default, but it's not very conscious. Maybe it's very subconscious. But what would you feel if it was taken away tomorrow, most threatened by? What would you feel most threatened by if it was taken away tomorrow? That often gets to the crux of it. What are you putting the most amount of energy into maintaining or protecting in your life? I think after having loads of different conversations with people of faith and not of faith over many different years, I've come across three quite common foundational aspects to people's lives. And I wonder if you resonate with these. The first would be finances, money, wealth. Finances can bring a sense of security to many of us. We see wealth as bringing opportunities into our lives. We see wealth as a way to avoid pain and difficulty in this life often. Wealth brings a certain amount of comfort with it. It brings a certain amount of convenience, often makes things just feel a little bit easier. Also can give an illusion of control. I think, like we have more control in our lives than we actually do. That if we can somehow kind of align things in a certain way, maybe take the right opportunities, get the right grades, marry the right person, send our kids to the right school, whatever it might be, that we might be able to somehow anesthetize ourselves to the difficulties and pains of this life. Dodge life's curveballs, maybe. And I think what's hard is there is some half-truths to all the things that I've just said, which makes them so convincing, which makes it often so tempting to make wealth kind of the safety net of your life. But while money does have the ability to take the rough edges off life, and that's definitely true. I'm not saying that's not true. Like food and shelter, yeah, those things cost, and those things will definitely make your life better than if you didn't have them. The problem with it is beyond those things, experts agree that it doesn't deliver in the way people think it will. It often comes with ever diminishing returns. Have you heard of the chocolate cake principle? Okay, you have now. So if I was to offer you a piece of chocolate cake right now, I'm also not doing this, no donuts, no chocolate cake. But if I was to offer you a piece of chocolate cake right now from behind here, I should have got one out, shouldn't I? Big chocolate cake. And if I was to offer you one, I think I'm sure you would accept it gladly and you would enjoy it. If I was to cut you a second piece and say, here you go, here's another, you'd think, it's my lucky day. This is awesome. If I was to offer you a third piece, some of you would still take it, like I can see right now. But some of you would start to think, this isn't such a good idea. I'm feeling a bit, icked out. It's a bit sickly. I'm not really sure. And the happiness the first piece brought you, or the anticipation of enjoying the first piece, it's just not quite equal to the fourth, to the fifth, to the sixth piece. And it's the same with money and happiness. We think it will keep delivering. We think it will kind of bring peace and happiness and just it'll be a never-ending kind of curve. And it's just not. It plateaus very quickly. It doesn't bring the peace and happiness that we often think it will. And not only that, but it's often really fragile and it's fleeting. Like often money is lost as quickly as it's gained. That's one of the common stories if you follow anyone who's made any money. Stock markets crash, businesses fail, inflation hits, unexpected expenses arise. When I was growing up, there was a family who I knew who probably were the most best off family that I knew around me at the time. And they had particularly good jobs, but they didn't have just a particularly good job, one that owned his own business. They also had like portfolios, like investments. And you kind of knew about it. You spent any amount of time with them and they would like to talk about it a little bit. And you knew what was important to them. But what was fascinating was, even though they were like one of the best off families that like I knew, far better off than we were and many others around us, what I noticed was any hint of like economic change, anything on the news, as I overheard conversations, I realized it had a massive effect on how they felt about their lives. It had a massive effect on the amount of peace that they seemed to be enjoying. It was like their peace and happiness was almost as volatile as the stock market. It went up, it went down, it went up, it went down. It took such an emotional, amount of emotional energy and focus in their life. And ultimately, it seemed like it was shifting sand under their feet. Maybe you resonate a little bit with that. Or maybe for you, you're like, no, it's not really that. Like, that isn't the safety net. Maybe for you, it's the people closest to you. And I think the second and third thing that I found in having conversations with people are super common, and it's friends and family. So foundational, friends and family. And I think this is really, really natural. I mean, we even kind of call people, don't we, who've been there for us over a long period of time or supported us through some particularly difficult things. We often call them what? They're our rock, right? They're our rock. So interesting that it parallels the story. That's what we call them. And for those of us fortunate to have good people in our life who've been there for us, don't get me wrong, they're a massive gift. They're a massive blessing in our life. But for every one of us who's had people closest to us like that come through for us, I think there's just as many people who, as soon as like a hard time has hit and they've gone to the people closest to them, they've let them down. Maybe there's people who have not been there for you at a time when you thought that they would be. Maybe their expectations of the friendship just didn't really match your expectations of the friendship. And rightly or wrongly, it's just different. They were just different. And it was upsetting. Maybe it was destabilizing. Maybe you'd say, yeah, Rich, I hear that, but not my family. No, not my family. Maybe my friends will let me down. Maybe even my closest friends could possibly, but not my family, not my blood, not the people who have just brought me into this world. Well, I think we would like to say that would be true until you realize that some things are just really out of our control, aren't they? Some things we are not in control of. Some things we just don't see coming. And as hard as it is to contemplate that, the people that we rely on, the rocks of our life, are just as fragile and susceptible to illness, to tragedy, to hard times, and sadly to even death, as we are, aren't they? I know this is a sober part of the message, but just think about that for a moment. Why? Because the storms of life, Jesus says in this parable, are very real, they're exposing, and they hit both houses. They don't just hit one house, they hit both houses. Verse 27, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Storms in the Bible are a visual image of the trials that we face. There isn't a way of avoiding stormy trials. Lots of energy we often put into trying to avoid, but they are ultimately often unavoidable. And I also know that we all have that one friend who seems to bring a storm into their life every 2 minutes. And that is true. You know, humanity's ability to self-sabotage is really big. But also often some things just come out the blue, don't they? They just come out the blue. The car crash, the diagnosis that you were dreading, the loss of a dream job. Maybe it's the betrayal of a friend or the death of a loved one. And you might be here today, and actually for you, you're like, well, you're kind of putting your finger on the one thing, the reason, my biggest barrier to believing in God in the first place. Maybe I came today to please my friends, but actually this is the big one for me, suffering. Actually, the idea of somehow being able to reconcile suffering with a God of love, you just find really difficult. I want to say, if that is the barrier for you today, just let me gently put it to you in the next couple of minutes, if you'll come with me. It might not be the trump card to Christianity that you've been led to believe that it actually is. The scriptures tell us this up front. They say we should expect pain and we should expect difficulty. It's not actually a curveball in life, because the Bible talks about how we live in a fallen world, not a perfect world. Jesus is upfront about the storm. It's one of the reasons why I love to lean in, and one of the reasons that made me lean into Jesus as I kind of grew and started exploring my faith. I'm like, this guy isn't a salesman keeping the bad news away. He's saying, this is what you can expect, but come and follow me. Still come and follow me anyway. He gives us the potential, he gives us the bad news, he gives us the risk all up front. This world is not as it should be. That is the Christian worldview. The problem is, we are not as we should be as well. It's like God has created a good creation, but sin and brokenness have tainted it and made it almost unrecognizable, almost like a virus that has been let into the system and has wreaked havoc. That is what sin has done to a perfect world, a perfect system. Jesus acknowledges pain and suffering, and he says it is a problem. It's a problem I've come to bring comfort to, and it's a problem I've come ultimately to solve. That's what Jesus says. However, if you dismiss God, if that's too hard and you think, I'm not going to believe, I can't do that, I'm dismissing him altogether, then all you're left with is pain and suffering being a normal part of life. That is what you're left with. In atheism, suffering and pain isn't a problem at all. It's actually business as usual. It's just life. It's just the way it is. Richard Dawkins, who's probably one of the most foremost atheists, he says this: in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt and other people are going to get lucky. You won't find any rhyme or reason to it. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect there is. At bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Wow. I think you must have wrote that on a fairly bleak, grey British day, don't you? Pitiless indifference. The problem is, when suffering comes into our life, we're not indifferent to it, are we? We're not indifferent to it at all. C.S. Lewis, who was a former atheist and writer, he writes this. I think he summarizes it so well. He says, "My argument against God was, so speaking formally, was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. Our experience when storms come our way, when suffering hits, isn't indifference, but it's often grief, it's often pain. It feels wrong, it's not as it should be, and that's exactly what God says to us. It's not as it should be. It is a problem. It isn't as it should be, and one day it will be made right. I don't think you need to be told today the suffering isn't a problem. I think you need a foundation in your life that will hold no matter how powerful the storm that comes into your life. God doesn't promise to protect us from storms. If you have ever heard that before, come to Jesus, easy life on the way, that is false. He does not promise to protect us from storms, but he does promise to be our foundation in the midst of the storm. The wise man, what does he do? He digs. He digs down deep. He gets through all the sand. He digs and he digs until he hits rock. It's hard work. It's the thing on a build that takes the longest. It's the least impressive. It takes a lot of time. You don't have loads to show for it that's above ground. But when you finally strike rock, dink, when you finally get through the soft stuff, when you finally hit rock, you know that it's not going anywhere. So let me ask today, what might it mean for you to build your life on a firm foundation? Now you've heard Jesus' words. What will you do with his wisdom? He's speaking to you just as much as he's speaking to me. What's given me confidence to build and trust his teaching is actually more than just the wisdom of his words, but it's actually the actions of his life. It's not just the wisdom of his words, and I think he is the wisest teacher to ever live, but it is the actions of his life. Zoom out from this moment for a second with me. Cast your mind to the end of Jesus' life, and what you'll find is Jesus on another mountain, the Mount of Crucifixion, when he's no longer surrounded by his disciples and his friends because they've all deserted him. And it's at the cross where Jesus faces the biggest storm that has ever blown into anybody's life on our behalf. It's there where he faces the greatest shaking that anyone has ever experienced in life. It's there where he takes the sin and the pain and the brokenness of this whole world on his back. It's at the cross where Jesus breathes his last breath and ultimately collapses. How do you know that he's the rock that will never let you down? How do you know that he's the security that you truly do long for? He takes the death that we deserved, the shaking that we most fear. Under God's perfect judgment, his house collapses. His house, his life collapses in on itself in order that if we might trust in him, our house, our life might stand firm forever. One day every other foundation will crumble. That's what he's saying to us. One day every other foundation will crumble, leaving only one. Come to Jesus. Step off the sand and make him the foundation of your life. Do you want to stand with me? I'm going to pray for us, and the band are going to come. Just want to remind you of those questions. What is most foundational to your life right now? I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't know what shaking may be occurring, what's taking up most of your energy and emotional energy at this time. But what is your life built on? Thank you, Jesus, that in this story you seek to expose lovingly the faulty foundations. Thank you, Lord, that you don't let us continue building blindly to only one day have it all collapse under our feet without our knowing, but instead you say, come to me quickly, come to me soon. Build on me. Don't build on the things that will let you down. You're like a good doctor who exposes the illness. You're a good friend who tells the truth. You're a good parent who doesn't just give the answer we want to hear, but you give the answer that is best for us. And you say, come to me and build on me. Let's worship him together.